So you've leveraged your time, you sat down and did that A1 task once, and then give it a week, your virtual assistant will then have almost downloaded your brain, your thinking patterns, and be able to then implement that themselves by managing the inbox. And at that point...
So then once you have that process in place for removing yourself from certain jobs, clearly it's very important to have other people complete tasks for you. So what type of tasks are you quite quick to pass over to other people, and which jobs would you suggest for people, especially that are going to start in an e-commerce business, that they hand over to other people to outsource?
The first types of tasks would be the highly repeatable, systemizable, if that's a word, tasks where you have things that can just be taught, replicated, broken down into steps and passed on. Now, those actually are the vast majority of tasks. It's difficult for us as entrepreneurs sometimes to fall into the trap of thinking that only we can do a certain task. Challenge yourself next time you take on a complex task that you've done before. There must be a process. There must be steps as to how to do this. And if you can break it down into those steps and use a tool like Asana, for example, that we use, to really systematize and create a set of standard operating procedures for that, you can pass it on. A good example of a more like a bigger task that perhaps has a lot more moving parts would be like the migration of a theme, right? So if you have your website created, you have your store up and running, but you want to change the theme that it's built on, that's something that I've known in the past that I needed to do, but I would always put it on the back burner because it's a big task. It's a lot of undertaking. It needs a lot of different moving parts and things done. And so I kept delaying and thinking I'll tackle that at some point, but it just you never get to that point. So what I decided to do was, I need to bring in somebody in our team who can just focus on that solely, right? And this is where sites like Upwork are great, because you don't have to hire a full-time designer or developer. You can just partner with one for a short period of time for a fixed set fee and have them do that work. And that way you can step back from the detail and just focus on like project milestones and say, hey, we need a first draft or a wireframe design done by this date. We then need the preview theme done here. We'll do some user testing here, and then it can go live on this date. And that way the whole task happens. You were realistic with yourself from the start that if it was left to just you as the business owner, it was probably never going to happen, because it would have never been top priority, because the current theme worked. It just wasn't what you wanted. And it then allows you to get a lot more done by leveraging other people's time, if you look at it like that.
Yeah, so this is a crucial point for everyone listening. The only way that we can create massive success for ourselves is to have huge output from every day that we put in. So how can we get the most amount of output from the least amount of input? And by leveraging other people, that's one of the biggest things we can possibly do. So when you have a big task that you know is going to take your business to the next level, and you identify that perhaps changing a theme is that task, instead of you dedicating the next 2 months to doing that, which will take you away from any other task, how can you get somebody else who's an expert in that area? And then you can focus on the next task, what's then going to take you to the next level, so that you're not constantly looking at the minutiae of the day-to-day tasks. So these conversations, it does remind me of the 4-hour work week, and some of the tasks that we do naturally are work for work's sake. And this idea of work for work's sake is brought up in the 4-hour work week. It was the first time I came across it. And as soon as I heard this phrase, I realized that I was spending so much of my time doing work purely for the sake of doing work. So have you come across this as well, Lewis?
Yeah, so this, in the world of work, I think this presents itself very universally as like letting the inbox dictate what you do with your day. That's the common almost productivity standard in the corporate world. It's like you just sign in to your inbox, you see what emails are there, and then you let other people pull you in various directions to dictate your day. That's not the way that I would want to run my business now or have any of my team do it, but it was the way I did it. And when I read the 4-hour work week, I realized that all I was really doing by doing that was just treading water. I was just trying to kind of maintain, but eventually you just run out, you burn out, but you're not going anywhere. You're not doing anything or achieving much. You're just kind of fighting fires as and when they land in your inbox. And so after understanding the concepts in that book, I realized how efficient I was actually being with my time. Even though I thought I was busy, I was very inefficient. I was letting the inbox dictate my day. I wasn't batching tasks. So there's this task switch time and energy load that's required to say, okay, I'm going to finish doing that project, but now I'm going to start doing this one. And in order to switch to that task, there's a huge mental load that's required, and it takes you however long, 15, 20, 30 minutes to actually get into doing that next task. And also just saying yes to everything that landed, like all of the opportunities that would be presented. I just say yes to everything, and then you kind of end up with no time for yourself to actually do anything that matters. So once I started applying some of the principles from the 4-hour work week, like really defining my own goals, and then once I had those goals clear, eliminating the distractions and just working on how do I do this, and then how do I build in automations that can get us towards that stage automatically. So none of the treading water stuff is happening. Well, if it is happening, it's happening with a system, that automatically deals with those things. And then starting to delegate some of those bigger projects that I knew would really move the needle on the business, so that I could multiply my output by 10 by putting in somebody in place, either through Upwork or through like a virtual assistant, who could do what I do, but 10 times more of it, because they're doing it full time and they have that time to invest in it.
Yeah, and I can completely resonate with that idea of treading water while you're at work, and, working hard like a hamster in a wheel, but actually getting nowhere at the end of the day. And the biggest breakthrough for me in terms of how to be most productive with my time was coming across the 4-hour work week and the idea of work for work's sake, and realizing that because I had a 9-to-5 job and you were expected to work for 9 to 5, 8 hours a day, then even if you completed your tasks by 3:30 that day, because you're expected to be working till 5, you then just create work for yourself, or you make yourself busy for the next hour and a half on work that's not actually going to move the needle for the business or the roles that you have, but you're creating work for yourself just purely to get through to the end of those hours. And that then means you're just wasting your time in a way, because you're doing work that is just work to keep you busy, and it's not really going to help you to get anywhere. So I'm keen to think, how did you eliminate that idea of work for work's sake to make sure that you were 10 times more effective with the time that you put in?
One of the ways that I would do it is start by identifying your most important tasks and prioritize them. An example of this that happens, we see when people launch businesses for the first time, whether it be dropshipping businesses or whatever type, usually, is they focus on things like getting their website perfect or getting their logo perfect, right? And this can take weeks. Entrepreneurs, like, I'm on my 5th draft of the logo, and it's like, I'm constantly tweaking it. And do you think this, like, you see people put these things out on social media, like, which of my 5 logos do you think we should launch with? And in my mind, that's like, well, that's the wrong thing to focus on. Why not? Unless you are a graphic, and even if you are a graphic designer, if you're trying to create a business, you almost need to take off that designer hat, hand over the controls to someone who's going to focus fully on that eventually. But for now, get something that's like minimum viable version, minimum viable product up and running, because that's not the thing that's going to make you sales, the logo. So yeah, figure out what your most important tasks are. So for dropshipping, it might be getting your company up and running, having your website built to a minimum viable standard, and then signing suppliers, and then launching ads and actually driving traffic so that you can start making sales. And with the profit from those sales, reinvest that into a graphic design team who can revamp your logo and your branding, colors and fonts and everything, and make the whole thing look great, right? Don't spend your time doing that before you've made any money with it, because it's just an inefficient way to do it. And sometimes when you're starting out with the business, it's difficult to know, well, which are those big tasks. So there's a great book called Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy, which is a great system for ranking tasks. And he kind of has this concept of like, you look at a list. So if you ever have a to-do list, right, for your business, you look at, well, what are the A's, what are the B's, and what are the C's on there? So you write A next to all of the things that are the big ones. Then from your A's, what's A1? What's the absolute top, highest impact task you could be working on? Then what's A2? And then what's A3? If you rank them in that order, even if you only achieved A1 today, you would have made 90% more impact than if you had just tackled whatever the first few were on the list, right? So it's always worth doing that. That's one methodology that I use, which is quite nice.
Yeah, thank you for that book recommendation. So that's Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. I haven't come across that one before. Perhaps I thought it was a French cookbook or something along those lines, but I'll pick that one up and have a read of that. So when you read that, how did you then apply that to work out what your most impactful tasks were and start to outsource the others?
Well, a good kind of practical example of how that might work is if you've just say your business is starting to grow, right? You're making sales, you're getting inquiries landing in the inbox, things are starting to happen. And say you brought on board your virtual assistant. So in week 6 of our program, we give you the templates, we kind of give you the video tutorials of how to actually hire your first virtual assistant. So you bring in the virtual assistant, but you've got hundreds of emails. Now, the temptation is for the virtual assistant to be there and you to just think, well, it's faster for me to just answer the emails because I know how to respond to them. But obviously, if you do that, you're treading water because the next day it's going to be the same thing. And then the next day. So you almost need to take one step backwards to take 2 steps forwards, right? You have to figure out what the A1 task here is probably sitting down for 2 or 3 hours with the virtual assistant and either having them shadow me or just explaining to them how and why I would answer certain emails in certain ways and try and systematize that stuff as best you can so that if ever another member of the team joins and you have 2 virtual assistants, you have the processes, the recordings, the training captured. So you've leveraged your time, you sat down and did that A1 task once, and then give it a week, your virtual assistant will then have almost downloaded your brain, your thinking patterns, and be able to then implement that themselves by managing the inbox. And at that point, those hundreds of emails will be dealt with every day by them, and eventually even by automated systems, because you can have templates, FAQ libraries, things like that. And you've achieved a lot more for the long-term growth of your business than had you just jumped straight into the chaotic, time-demanding email inbox, which is so tempting to do.